Professor Nikolai Petrovsky is not only Australia's leading vaccinologist, but a scientist denied the right to do what he does best: produce for Australia an alternative vaccine to the COVID mRNA vaccines. Professor Petrovsky has faced an enormous battle trying to engage with the federal government to run trials for his COVID vaccine, even though it has been an overwhelming success internationally. Recently, the TGA sought to fine Professor Petrovsky for discussing his trials on his own website, alleging he was breaching TGA advertising guidelines. Welcome, Professor.
Nice to be here.
Now, the TGA stopping you from mentioning your own vaccine on your own website. How has that come about?
Well, we don't understand, obviously, the motives for the TGA. Our legal advice is that, we have not advertised our vaccine in Australia, and nor would we, because it's not available for sale here, and it wouldn't be available for sale until such time as we had TGA approval, and they are fully aware of that. So, their attack against us and their obviously intent, which is to stop us being able to discuss our vaccine in any shape or form in Australia, would only seem to advantage our competitors. So I guess the key question would be, is TGA working for Pfizer and our competitors to prevent us being able to discuss our vaccine, which we think is in the public interest, that the public want to know, what's happening with our vaccine, what stage is it at, what's happening in the clinical trials, both here in Australia. The public is entitled to that information. So to have the TGA try to completely silence us and make it impossible for us to talk about our vaccine in Australia is, I think, quite an extraordinary situation. And it really does go to what are the motives of the TGA in attempting to do that. Our legal advice is very, very strongly of the opinion that we haven't broken any rules or regulations. And as I say, what we're trying to do is to just provide information to the public to let them know and answer their questions, which is what's happening with our vaccine here in Australia and overseas. But as of now, in order to avoid any further attempts by the TGA to penalise us with massive fines, I can't mention our vaccine's name in any commentary in Australia today, whereas obviously our competitors are free to say whatever they like about their vaccines and even, perhaps inflate the effectiveness of their vaccines and downplay any downsides of their vaccines, and the TGA does nothing to stop that. So it really is a very unfair situation, and one that we'll be seeking to address through the appropriate channels as we go forward.
Now, you mentioned the massive fines or penalties that you've threatened you with. What are we talking about here, Professor? How much?
Well, the fine that they've currently imposed on us, which we've been forced to pay, was just over $13,000. But in that notice, they indicated that the maximum penalty is just over $11 million, and that's the threat that they're levelling against us if we, in any way mention our vaccine or what we're doing and our clinical trials here in Australia. So that's the threat hanging over our head from the TGA as we speak.
Now, the vaccine that we're not allowed to mention by name for fear of the $11 million fine, it's currently available overseas and being used, and not in trials, but actually in use.
That's correct. So the vaccine that we developed is approved for use in Iran, both as a primary vaccine course, but also now as a booster. And over 6 million doses of that vaccine have been safely delivered within Iran.
And just to be clear, the reason that you went to Iran is when you began production and use of this, Iran was a hotspot for COVID, and so it wasn't a matter of, well, we'll go there because conditions are easier, regulations are easier. It was because here is where we will get the biggest bang for buck for use. This is where we will have the most robust data.
Absolutely, because, you know, Iran has been through a terrible, situation with the spread of COVID. So obviously that's where the need was at the time we were developing the vaccine. We found a great partner, Synergen, which is a private company in Iran, who shared our mission to, improve public health through developing a vaccine. And so we partnered with them, and obviously that made it possible to do the late stage clinical trials in Iran and get it approved in Iran. And now we're looking to get it approved in multiple other countries, including hopefully in Australia, if we can find a way to deal with the TGA.
Yeah. Now, you've had difficulties engaging with the government. I understand that the opposition have been no more forthcoming in engaging, so the change of government isn't really going to change anything. But now it seems that they're actively working against you. So it's not only ignoring one of Australia's leading vaccinologists, one of the world's most recognised and respected vaccinologists, but now they seem to be working against you. Would that be a fair characterisation?
Look, I unfortunately, I think so. I think, as you say, the only support we've had has really been from the independents and some of the smaller parties. And so, I think, unfortunately, both of the major parties are clearly under the influence of forces that don't believe in fairness and giving people a fair go. Our suspicion clearly is that there's an enormous amount of money has been changed hands in the last 2 years, and that some of that, 6.5 billion or whatever the number is today that Greg Hunt says that he spent on vaccines, that some of that money is flowing back, unfortunately, to the major parties and influencing their decision making.
Now, you mentioned the Australian trials are underway. How far along are we with those Australian trials, Professor?
So essentially, we've pretty well fully recruited the current trial that we're doing here in South Australia. Our target for that trial was 200 subjects, so we're pretty well there now. We're now looking at some additional trials that we'll be setting up going forward to look at other questions like, can we use our vaccine as a third or fourth dose booster in people who've maybe had, an AstraZeneca or, a Pfizer mRNA vaccine, and maybe they've had a bad experience with that. And obviously, once that effectiveness of those vaccines wears off, which we know happens now very rapidly in the space of a few months, what we'll be looking to see is, can our vaccine actually, be used in that context to boost their immunity back up to where it should be without causing some of the side effects that we've seen with these other vaccines.
Now, given the TGA's threat of the $11 million fine, or up to $11 million fine, how will you publish this data, or is it just you're not allowed to name your vaccine by name?
No, look, I mean, it would appear that TGA would prefer that we are completely unable to talk about the existence of our vaccine. That's the implicit threat that they've levelled at us for reasons that I think, the public would want to know the questions. We can't answer those questions. Maybe the TGA or Greg Hunt could answer them if someone puts it to them and they're prepared to answer. But in essence, we don't know from their threats. Their threats are very broad ranging. And so we don't even know what the nature of those threats are. So, maybe even this conversation will be regarded by them. Again, they're unaccountable to anybody. You know, we're outside the rule of law now, where we have bodies in Australia that believe that they can target individuals or target companies, that they don't need any justification to do that, and they're completely unaccountable. And that's not a country that any of us want to live in, I believe. Doesn't matter which side we're on. You know, do any of us want to live in a country where there's no rule of law over, you know, these bodies, and how they're able to persecute people by basically, you know, misinterpreting or deliberately, you know, using laws in a way those laws were never intended to function. As I say, we've never sought to advertise our vaccine, and there's no point to do so. You know, we can't sell it. So the only reason to advertise is generally to sell and make money. You know, we don't make any money from our vaccine. Obviously, in the clinical trials, it's provided for free. The clinical trials cost a lot of money from us. We don't benefit from any of those activities. So to suggest that us talking about our trials is in some way advertising our vaccine, I think everyone would appreciate is a complete and utter nonsense, but it doesn't stop the TGA coming after us and trying to persecute us in this way for reasons that they refuse to explain.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, I just want to reiterate, this vaccine, 6 million doses in Iran, no glaring negative outcomes, very effective, no dubious counterclaims of any magical qualities, nothing alternative about it, developed by a leading vaccinologist, and now the TGA is saying do not speak about it. It's not to stop it doing harm. What is the point of the TGA's ban here from you speaking about it on its own website? We've got 96% vaccine coverage, so it's not going to make people hesitant. It's not going to make people delay getting vaccinated. What possible reason could the TGA have for saying do not mention it by name, do not speak about it, you can't sell it here, it's proven to be safe and effective? I'm at a loss to understand any of this.
Well, as I say, I think, you know, you would have to look at the interests of our competitors, and to what extent this plays into their hands. You know, the Australian government is obviously transferring billions of dollars of Australian taxpayer funding to these companies. You have to look at, could this potentially be of major benefit to them not to have any, you know, a potential competitor, you know, discussed, particularly if there may be aspects of that potential competitor that could be advantageous or favourable over the product the Australian government is spending billions of dollars on. So I think if you want to try and find where this is coming from, I would suggest that would be a very good place to look, and what's the connection between those competitors and the TGA, and downstream of that, the TGA's action to try and prevent us being able to talk about our vaccine.
All right, Professor Piotrowski, I'm going to finish with a quote from the wise Alice in Wonderland. It just gets curiouser and curiouser. Thanks for your time.
It's a pleasure.